my name is Denis Tarasov. I'm software engineer from St. Petersburg, Russia. Let me show you a presentation which is called Objects Recognition in Brain using Microplayers. It's introduction section. So many machine learning systems designed for object recognition require uploading a large number of images of objects to the system during the learning process. But human can remember objects using only one image of it. Then human is able to recognize the objects using its images of different form, size, and orientation. How it's possible? The impulses spread from one neuron to another in the brain in particular directions. The process in brain have complex dynamic, since the brain contains a lot of neurons, and neurons send impulses to other neurons. And it's low probability that system can recognize the image during one cycle of spreading of impulses from eye through the brain's network. In this model, neural network works in impulse mode by scanning the image many times during remembering and recognition. The feedback signals from eye to the network regulate direction of neuron impulses. Next slide is remembering of image. The teacher writes the number 3 on the desk and human remembers it. What happens in the brain at this moment? The eye moves in the direction S1. Then eye goes out of numbers contour and the frequency of impulses coming from eye to the network decreases. The process in network N1 that controls the movement of eye in direction S1 fades. The eye returns to the point on the numbers contour from which the movement in direction S1 was started. So the feedback impulses from eye increase because the point is on contour again. The impulse nature of brain means that stable process in the brain is also a dynamic process. Even in stable state, eye moves in some direction because of saccades. So redistribution of impulses happens. And the neighboring neurons became active. They move eye in direction S2, S3, S4. The search repeats until the eye starts to move in proper direction S1 along the numbers contour. The feedback loop closes and network receives stable impulses from eye with high frequency. So the system goes to stable state and long-term potentiation stores connection between neurons. Then eye reaches the point where contours change its direction again. And the eye goes out of contour and process repeats until the eye begins to move in next proper direction D2. And the same steps continue until the end of numbers contour. The described steps are similar, simple, and repeatable. The brain can't allow different processes to remember different objects because it would add not necessary complexity to it. The name microplayer or just player is used for such neural networks since they are small and play the remembered path between neurons. The next slide is image recognition. The recognition of number is performed by the same neural networks which were used for remembering. The process of recognition and remembering are also similar. During recognition, eye moves along the contour of number 3. The neural networking player receives stable impulses from eye with high frequency. Then eye reaches the point where contour's direction changes and eye goes out of contour. As a result, the frequency of impulses coming from eye to the player decreases. The local searches of contours points occur relatively to the current direction of eye, as shown on figure with small errors. The eye groups neighboring points, trying to find points on contour to continue to move along it. After finding of such points, the neural network starts to receive impulses from I with higher frequency, and local search terminated. The system goes to the stable state, and I moves in direction D1 along contour of number. This process repeats, and I moves along the contour in directions D2, D3, and so on until the end of contour. The control of I's muscles moves from the network N1 to N2, and then to N3, and so on. So recognition in such system is accordance between the process in neural network, which was remembered during education, and the contour of number in front of I. Then next slide is recognition of rotated image. The neural network knows nothing about orientation or scale of numbers contour. The process of recognition determines the new direction of I's movement relatively to the previous direction, so the system can recognize rotated number. The next slide is recognition of intersected contour. The region A is partly dashed part of numbers contour, and the region B is intersected part of numbers contour. Is the system able to recognize such number 3? Probably yes, since such system has inertia. The process in the network can't change in an instant. So the eye just jumps over regions A and B and moves further along the numbers contour. Generalized recognition of image. The player does not know that it recognizes number 3. For example, the system can recognize two variants of contour, red contour 1 and green contour 2, depending on the direction of eye at the moment of contour's point search. So the system is able to generalize and recognize the number 3 of different forms. Next slide is recognition of different numbers. Suppose that we remembered all numbers from 1 to 9, and the brain contains individual players for each number. Then image of number 3 is presented and brain must recognize it. During recognition, players for all numbers works independently and in parallel. All players receive the same impulses from I, and each player tries to recognize its own number. But only one player controls I, since there is only one set of I's muscles. Which player controls I's movement? If recognition process guided by feedback impulses from I stabilizes in one of player before processes in other players, then such player takes control on I's muscles. In our case, it's player for number 3. The recognition process fade in players for other numbers. So the active recognition process in player for number 3 and faded processes in players for other numbers means that we see number 3. But it's dynamic process. Imagine that control of contour of number 3 transforms into the contour of number 2 in front of eyes. Then player for number 3 becomes active and takes control on eyes muscles. The recognition process in player for number 3 fades. Its conclusion section. Is it possible to apply microplayers to explain brain's work in general? Probably yes. This article describes the process of image recognition, but some process can work in brain to recognize signals coming from other sources. A lot of players can work in parallel to recognize complex images or participate in other brain's activities. Thank you for your attention. If any question, please contact me via provided email. Thank you very much. Bye.